Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf tzadi hey. I will warn you, it's a bit of a complicated daf. It's one of those dafim, though, that if you have time and you can look at it after, the second time will make a lot more sense. It'll be more clear, but I will try my best to get it clear the first time. There's also a study guide, which will also help organize it in your head. Okay, the first part is fairly simple. We're going to finish up with where we started yesterday, and then we're going to move to the second part of today's daf, which is going to basically cover the whole daf. We started yesterday with a source of Gazlanim Milavei Ribi, this whole takana of Rebbe that basically, or the takana in the time of Rebbe, it's not clear if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi actually instituted himself, or it was just when he was alive, when he was in charge, that we wanted to encourage thieves and usurers to repent. So what did they decide? They said, well, listen, you don't actually have to return what you stole. Okay, we want to make the path easy. And again, this seems a little unfair. We discussed yesterday already that if you were brought to court, that's a different story. This is more if they're coming on their own. And we also said that it prevents future thefts. So in a sense, it protects the one who was stolen from that they won't steal from him again. So anyway, we have this takana, take it or leave it. It's a difficult takana to understand. On the other hand, we understand in order to encourage people, it's very hard to return all stolen money. You might not have it anymore, right? That's also part of the problem. We'll talk about that soon. Then that seemed to contradict this other source that said that if you're a roetzon, you're a shepherd, or you collect tax money, which these are people who often are thought of as cheaters. The shepherds let their animals graze in other people's fields. The tax collectors often collect extra money and pocket it for themselves. Then it says, Chuvatan kashe. It's very hard for them to go back and do tshuva, but they have to return. So why is it difficult? Because they don't know exactly who they stole from. It's impossible to keep track. So we said, if they know who it is, they have to return it to them. If they don't know who it is, then we give it to for use for public funds. To which we said, what do you mean? Don't they not have to return it? Isn't that what we said? So we answered one answer yesterday, the very end of the daf. Perhaps this was before the takana of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or the one that happened in his time, and that would resolve it. Once there's a takana, they no longer have to return it. But the Gemara suggests another answer. Second to last line in Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Bet. Rav Nachman b'she'en zela kayemet. But Rav Nachman already said, this is the whole takana of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is only if you don't still have the stolen item. Now this makes sense. If I have the stolen item of yours in my house, what, we're not going to make me return it? That would be crazy. You're going to sit there in your house not having your item that you know that I stole. Like I stole your computer. I get to keep your computer? That's crazy. So he says the whole takana of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is if there is no stolen item anymore. Once we say that, it's very simple now to answer, although there's a bit of a difficulty with this answer, but I'll put that question aside. I'll kind of mention it, but put it aside. You could say they're both after the takana, but lo kasha. If there's no item left. Now, again, this makes tshuva much harder. If you don't have the item anymore, right? So I stole your computer, and then I sold it, and I took the money and I bought food for my family, or I did whatever I did with it. I might not have the money anymore. And even if I do, that's really hard to return because, it's just a lot of money I've stolen over the years, and I might not be able to afford paying back all that money. So if it's not kayemet anymore, that's what the takana was all about. But if it's there, then I have to return it. There's a minor problem here, which is, what's the case that we're now saying? So let's look at our two sources. Okay, if you look at the study guide, it's even clearer. In the case where we just say the general takana, okay, there were thieves, this, that means when there's no item left, that's when you return. The ro'im, the mochsin, who collect all this stuff from people, right? Then, and they steal their animals grazed in other people's lands, that's a case where what they stole is actually still there. Well, we have a problem with the grazing. If the ro'im, which we usually assume the problem is that they're grazing in other people's fields, what, the grass is still in existence? The grass is not in existence. The animals ate it. How could you possibly say that was a case of the gazela is kayemet? So some of this, what it really means is we're talking about a shepherd who grazed with other animals of other people. They were a shepherd for other people. They worked for other people. And what they stole the milk. They stole the shearings, and that they still have. Okay, that's what we'd have to say. Again, hard to imagine we'd still have the milk, but maybe it's soon after they decide to repent. The shearings may be more so. So it's a little bit of a weakness in that explanation, but we'll live with it. Now, here's another problem the Gemara suggests. raises. The takana of Rebbe was in a case where a stolen item is no longer in existence. But remember what happened in the story. This woman said to her husband, how are you going to go repent? He wanted to repent. She said, how are you going to repent? You're going to have to return even the belt that you're wearing. So Havnate, this belt, digzela kayemeti. The assumption was it was a stolen belt. So that means he still had the stolen item. And she said, what, you're going to return the belt, the thing you wear every day? Mayavnate to mayavnate. No, what it meant is everything in our house was bought from stolen money. Not that it was actually stolen. The belt, it was that if you're going to have to, right, everything in our house was bought from stolen money. How are you going to return everything in our house? We'll have nothing to live on. So that resolves that question. But we have one more problem, which is something we learned in Gittin, and we've talked about it already here a few times. But wait, if the stolen item is still in existence, the rabbis didn't make a takana then? What about hamaresh? Digzela kayemeti utznan hamaresh hagazul shebneo b'bira. She told them b'pnei takana shavim. What's the halacha there? If I steal a beam and I build it into my house, I don't have to return the beam because it's a pain, right? Again, in order to encourage people to repent. This, by the way, was done before the takana of Rebbe. But the point is, what do you see here? The gzela is still kayemet. It's in existence, but I don't have to return it. Okay? So now, what do I actually have to do? I have to return the value of it. Okay? But I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. I don't have to return the actual item, but I do have to return its value. So now, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But what they're really trying to say right now is, what did we say? If the gzela is kayemet, you have to return it. Now, this shows it's still kayam, and I don't have to actually return it. To which they answer, and therefore, shavya Rabbanit k'deleit. Now, this sentence sounds very simple, but it's not really telling the whole story. And for that, I put a chart on the sheet to tell the whole story. But what they're basically saying is, in a simple way, let's just not even think too much about this, and then we'll think about it more and we'll see where the problem is. What they're saying is, again, we made a very simple distinction. If the object is there, then you have to return it. If the object is not there, you don't have to return it. And that's the case where we say, right, that you give back the value to be yotze, right, to kind of fulfill your technical obligation by God. But in the end, they say you can't get right. We don't want to accept it because they have to make it easy for you to repent. So basically, we're going to stick takanat maresh in that category because we're going to say, even though it's kayemet, I don't actually have to return the item because what? Because it's going to be a loss for me, right? And therefore, it's going to make it hard for me to do tshuva because I'll have to take apart my whole house. So therefore, I don't have to return it. But the problem is, the halacha is not exactly that I don't have to return it. I have to return its value, right? It's not the same as what we said for the takana. The takana is, I pretend to return it. I try to return the value. And you say, no, it's okay. It's really, you don't have to return it. So we have a little bit, something doesn't work here. It makes it sound like there's two categories because the Gemara says very simply, Shavua Rabbanan k'deleta. They make it as if you don't have it. So now the commentaries kind of help resolve this and explain it. And for this, I did a chart to make it clear. Rashi, you can look at Rashi. Rashi says, where it says, Mishum Pseida Debira Shavya Rabbanan k'deleta, in my Gemara, it's the third line in Rashi. Miu dame bai lahadure. Rashi points out, but you do have to return the value of it. Now, why? What we just said is, if the gzela is not existent, right, anymore, you don't even have to return the money because that's the whole idea of making it easy for you to do tshuva. And takanat shavim is like that, even though it's in existence. But comes Rashi and he says, it's like it to the extent that you don't have to return the actual item, but you do have to return the value. And why is that? Now, what Rashi really means, he says, in the end, you have the stolen item in your house. That you can't keep a stolen item. It's like it's not there, but it is there. So it's in between, which means so let's just go through our scale now. You have the stolen item in hand, you must return it. Even if it's hard to repent, it doesn't matter. You can't live with my computer. I can't live with having stolen your computer, have it in my house. There's no way. If I stole your computer, I must return you your computer if I still have it. But if I took a beam and I built it into my house and I would have to take apart my entire house, then we make me return the value. I still can't get away with this whole takana of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi of saying, I don't even have to return that because there's no way that you could, I have an item of yours in my house and I'm not returning anything. There's no way. That the Takanav Rebbe doesn't apply. So theoretically, we could say it's like, right? It's not the case where you actually have to return the item, but you do have to return its value. And then on the other extreme, we have where you don't have the stolen item anymore. Then we go through this Hakanav Rebbe where we say, oh, please take it back. And then they say, no, we won't take it back. And that's the third category. So it kind of made it sound like there were two, but there really are three, as Rashi points out. Okay, now we're going to go to the bit more complicated part of today's stuff, which is our Mishnah has two cases, okay? Both cases, there's a para ameuberet v'yalda rachel tu'una v'gazazah. I stole in the first case, okay? It's the second case of our Mishnah, the second set of cases, but we're going to deal with the second part of the Mishnah and the third part. So we have a para who's pregnant, and then she gives birth while, okay, I'm the thief here. While it's by me, the animal gives birth. Rachel tu'una v'gazazah, I steal a sheep that's full of wool on its body, and then I shear it. Then, according to our Mishnah, Mishalem demei para homedet leled udemei Rachel homedet ligazez. I have to return it the way it was at the time. Now it doesn't have the wool on it anymore. Doesn't have the baby, the offspring in its fetus, as a fetus anymore in its body. I have to pay the value it was at the time of the theft. If I stole a para and it got pregnant by me and then gave birth, okay, but it wasn't pregnant at the time I stole it, or likewise with the sheep, again, I pay the way it was at the time of the gzela. But now we're going to see a similar case, but a three-way machloket. Okay, well, right now, our Mishnah doesn't really interest us so much. That was just the background. Now we're going to talk about Tanu Rabbanan. And what exactly the case is, we're going to have to figure out. Hagozel Rachelu Gezazan. Now notice it doesn't say whether the Rachel had wool on it or didn't have wool on it. So we're going to go with Rashi, who thinks it had wool. There happens to be a whole different way to read this sugya, as if it didn't have wool when I stole it. But we're going to go with Rashi, which is, I stole it, it had wool on it. So let's just go with numbers. Let's say a sheep without wool is worth 100, with wool is worth 120, but then I steal it, and it goes up in value while it's in my possession. Okay, it goes up to 140, because as time goes on, before I shear it, it's going to grow more. If it was a fetus, so the fetus will grow. I'm going to feed the animal. I'm causing what's called shevach. After I steal it, I'm making this animal worth more. So it was already worth more than the average, okay? It was worth more than a regular animal. I bring it up to 120. I bring it from 120 to 140. So time of the theft, it's 120. I bring it up to 140. Then I shear it. Then the animal gives birth. Now the animal's back to 100. But I have 100 and I have a pile of 40 of either baby or, offspring or wool. Okay, so now in the end it's worth 140, but when I stole it, it was 120, and the animal by itself, which is what it's worth right now, is only 100. So you have to remember those numbers in your head, and let's go through it. What does Rabbi Meir say? Mishalem otav et gizotav et ladoteh divrei Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, and that's the first shita we're really going to deal with. We're not going to really understand the other two yet. Basically, Rabbi Meir says, I have to pay all 140. You get the animals, you get the offspring, you get the wool, you get everything. Okay, I have to return all of it, even though I actually caused I made the animal get bigger, made the offspring better, I help with the birth, whatever it is, I have somewhat to do with that. Tough luck. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Gzela chozeret be'eneha. Rabbi Yehuda says, I give it back as it was at the time of, okay, so what we're going to understand Rabbi Yehuda be saying is, I give back the animal, and then I have to, the animal's only worth 100, but I stole 120, I have to give you in money the extra 20, okay? But not the extra, not the 40, only 20 of it, only what it was at the time I stole it. Rabbi Shimon Omer, okay, very unclear statement. We do an evaluation. Kind of evaluation, we assume it means we evaluate what it was at the time of the theft, and then you give back 120, which sounds like Rabbi Yehuda. So we're going to have to figure out what the difference is between them. But we're going to put those two opinions on the side right now. And now we're going to deal with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is very clear, okay? But the question is, what's the basis for Rabbi Meir? What we're going to now have is a question on Rabbi Meir, two sources that can answer the question. One source we're going to bring to answer the question and say this doesn't answer our question, and one source will answer the question, the second one. But then we're going to have a whole different version of the question they asked on Rabbi Meir. So then we're going to say, oh, no, that wasn't the question they asked on Rabbi Meir. That was obvious what the answer was. They asked a different question, Rabbi Meir. And then they're going to bring two sources again to try to answer the question. The first one will be rejected, and the second one will be accepted. And interesting that the second source they bring in both cases, both versions of the question they asked against Rabbi Meir, is the same source. And from there, they're going to get to the answer, but a different answer because it's going to be a different question. So again, if it wasn't totally clear, you'll see the structure as we go on. So first version of the question they asked Rabbi Meir. They asked the following question. My time at Rabbi Meir. Why does Rabbi Meir say that even the shevach, when I increased its value while it was with me, goes back to the person I stole it from? Is it mishum de kasaval shinui b'mkomo omed? Okay, this goes back to what we learned. If you say shinui b'mkomo omed, that was the Abaye said all those rabbis agreed that shinui b'mkomo omed, even though the general shita is shinui kone. Okay, let's just go through again. Shinui kone means I acquire it. If I acquired it, then the shevach will be mine because it's basically my animal and I just have to return the value from the time of the theft. If you say shinui b'mkomo omed, that means the fact that this animal changed, okay, that the wool grew more, that the animal, the fetus grew bigger and then was born, that is a shinui, but not such a big shinui. And we're going to view it as if all along the animal was still yours. I stole it from you. It was still yours. So whatever came out of this animal, even if it went up in value by me, what's the difference? It's yours. I return the whole thing to you. That would be a good explanation for Rabbi Meir. Oh, Dilma, or is it possible? No. In general, the mainstream opinion is shinui kone. So maybe he holds ba'alma shinui kone. And notice Rabbi Meir wasn't one of those listed on Abaye's list of he holds shinui b'mkomo omed. So maybe he really holds that shinui is kone, but what? Hacha knasehu de kakanis. But we're penalizing the thief. I stole. We should penalize me for stealing. I did a terrible thing. What? I'm going to gain from it now? How could I, right? This is what we say, lo yeheh poteni skal, that we shouldn't reward me. Okay, so I took your animal. Now it's true I fed it. So I did put a little money into it, but why should I gain from the benefits? Of course, I stole it from you. Your animal had a baby now, offspring. Give it back to you, the whole thing. So what that I added 20 to it? We have to penalize me. So listen, the idea here is, this is a penalty for the thief, but mi'ikar adin, by the letter of the law, I really own that shevach. It's mine. But the rabbi said I have to return it anyway. So now, lamai nafkamina, what's the relevance? Who cares whether we say, in the end, Rabbi Meir says I have to pay the whole thing. What's the difference? If it's because we view it as yours, or we view it as mine, but we're going to penalize me for it, what's the difference? Well, the nafkamina is laheka de kachasham mikdash. If it goes down in value. If it goes down in value, then what are we going to say? If it goes down, if we say the animal's yours, then we've learned this before. Take it as is. Okay? So basically, if the animal decreases in value, I could give you the lesser animal. If we say it's just if the shino is really kone, that means I have to give you from the moment it was stolen. And if it's a knas, well, the knas is irrelevant here because if we say that shino is kone, then basically I have to pay you the value it was at the time, right? And then the fact that it decreased, I can't gain from that. So that's the nafkamina. So let's see. Tashma, the first source is going to be a case where the animal decreases in value, and then we'll get to our answer. It'll be obvious. In the end, it won't be, but right now we're going to think it'll be clear. Gazal behema v'izkina, avadim v'izkinu. Here we have a source. I steal an animal and it gets old, meaning it goes down in value. I steal avadim, slaves, and they get old and weaker. They can't work as well. Mishalem kashad gzela. So the Tana Kamma says, you pay, this is not Rabbi Meir, you pay at the time of the theft. That would be because shino is kone, right? Rabbi Meir omer, ba'avadim omer, harei shachal lefanecha. If it's a slave, I say to you, take your weaker slave, tough luck, and you lose out when I return it to you. But ilu behema, now, he doesn't say, he only disagrees about the slave, which means what? He agrees about an animal. Now, we'll see in a minute why there's different slave and animal. Ilu behema kishad gzela. But with the animal, he agrees with Tana Kamma that I have to pay the value it was. If it went down in value, I have to pay its value at the time of the theft. That means shinoi is kone, because the loss is on me because I acquired the animal. Now it went down in value. That's my loss. But really, I have to pay you from the moment I stole it because I acquired it, again, for the sake of responsibility to pay you from the time of the Ksela. So, Isal Kadata, Savar Rabbi Meir, Shinovim Komomed, if you would say Shinovim Komomed, this animal was yours, it's still yours, and therefore I just, what would I do? I just return the animal as is. I would say Hareshal Chalafanecha, and therefore Afilu Behemanami. Rabbi Meir should agree in the case of the animal that I could just say, oh, here, take your animal. So it must be, he doesn't think Shino Komomed, he must hold Shino Kone, and it's a Knas. Okay, really, it must be that I acquired the item. So now let's go to our case. It increased in value. I really acquired the animal. The increase should be on me, but the rabbis penalized me and made me pay. To which they say, you misunderstood Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was talking according to the opinion of the rabbis. Let me explain to you before we even get there. What's the difference between slaves and animals? So animals, we would say, shinoi kone, okay? And that's why you don't just return the animal as is. But slaves, Rabbi Meir's opinion was, when it comes to a slave, now, this isn't something we discussed, but it's something that's agreed upon by everybody, which is when it comes to land, okay, land, we say karka ein and exelet. We haven't seen that yet. We're going to see it inside today. What does it mean, karka ein and exelet? It means I can't steal land. Of course I could steal land. But if I steal land, it doesn't become mine. This whole thing of shinoi kone is not true when it comes to land. Okay? It's not true because land is stable. It's in the same place. It's always yours until I buy it. The fact that I stole it doesn't mean anything. A movable item, yes, we could say I acquired it and I have to return it the value it was at the theft. But that whole concept of shinoi kone doesn't exist by land. What about slaves? Where do slaves fall? Are they like land or are they like animals? So they're a little tricky because in a sense, they're more stable than animals. They're right. On the other hand, they're not exactly because they are movable. So there's machloket about it, and that's what this is all based on. Rabbi Meir says, well, the avadim, the slaves are like land. And that's why the slave, you could just say, oh, take your slave as is, because it wasn't really acquired ever by the thief. Okay, that's what he said. But now in our new interpretation, we're going to say the following. Rabbi Meir this isn't really Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Meir was arguing according to the rabbis. In other words, Lididi, according to me, and this basically rejects this answering our question. Perhaps, this is just a different suggestion. We don't know. But perhaps Rabbi Meir holds, Shinoi ein kone afilu behemanami. I don't think Shinoi is kone at all. And that's exactly why I hold Shinoi b'mkomo made. You give back the animal with the vladot, with the wool, with everything. Okay, because I think it's all belongs to you, not me. I didn't acquire it, right? When I stole it from you, I got nothing. Okay, I think that across the board. But lidithu, you want to say Shino is kone? Well, at least, right? Lidithu damaritu Shino kone. Oh, delimia ba'avda de kimakarke dam bekarke and exelet. At least agree with me about a slave. You should at least agree that a slave is like land, and since a slave is like land, it shouldn't be kone. So what he's saying is at least on the slave, go by me. I think it's across the board, slave, animal, it doesn't make a difference. But you should at least agree with me about the slave. The Amr and the rabbis say, no, we disagree with you about the slave. Why? Because our perception of a slave is totally different. We view slaves as movables. So whatever's true for movables will be true for slaves. So basically the machloket between them is, how do we view slaves? Like land or like movables? But it has nothing to do with our issue because Rabbi Meir wasn't talking about his own opinion. He was talking about the rabbi's opinion. And therefore, perhaps he really does hold Shino b'mkomo made. Shino doesn't make any sort of change, really. Okay, so that source was inconclusive because you could read it as either Shino is kone, and that's why he thinks the animal, you have to pay at the moment of the theft because you did acquire it. And then he would say, by us, it's just a knas. Or he'd say, no, I think Shino really doesn't really change anything. And that's why you have to return the animal as is. Okay. And therefore we have no real answer. But second source, Tashma. Litzboa lo adom utzvao shachor. Shachor utzvao adom. You take your wool, that's your white, cleaned out wool, you take it to be dyed. You take it to be dyed red. And the guy in the store messes up the dyer and he dyes it black. Or you take it to be black and he dyes it red. This is the mission we're going to get to soon. Rabbi Meir Omer, no lo demate samro. Okay, I'm like, I could think you go to a seamstress and you say, make me a skirt, and they make you pants by accident. So now they increased its value and they made you a nice pair of pants. It's worth more than the fabric itself, but it's not what you asked for. So that's exactly what happens here. So what does the seamstress do when they do that? Rabbi Meir Omer, no lo demate samro. Rabbi Meir says, you just give back the value of the raw materials. I brought you fabric, so I get my fabric back. Okay? But what do you learn here? Demate samro in, demate samro v'shivcholo. You don't get the shevach. I don't get the added value, right? Now, note this is Rabbi Meir. So, Isa kadata safa Rabbi Meir, shinui ein kone. If he really held that shinui bimkomo omed, shinui doesn't change anything. Then what? If they changed, I went to the seamstress changed my fabric from, instead of making from plain material, instead of making it to a skirt to pants, if we say shinui doesn't make it hers, then I should get it back as is. I should get the pants back, right? Because they are worth more than the object itself. But, right, so demate samro v'shivcho ba'alametavle. They should have gotten back the dyed wool, because dyed wool is worth more than not dyed wool, even if it's not the color that I wanted. Therefore, the fact that Rabbi Meir doesn't say, I get the shevach back, must mean that Rabbi Meir doesn't really think the shevach comes back. Elalav shmamina, Rabbi Meir, kasava Rabbi Meir, shinui kone. Rabbi Meir thinks that shinui is kone. But what? In our case, even though shinui is kone, which means if I made the animal get fatter, bigger, the offspring is now bigger because of me, it has more wool because of me, or because it happened with I was in charge of it, I really theoretically should keep it for myself, that extra. Remember, I stole it, was 120, then it turned to 140. Now the animal went back to 100, but I still have all the 40 of produce from it. I should theoretically keep that extra 20, right? Between the difference between the time it was stolen and what it's worth now. But this is a penalty. Okay, so that's our answer. We got to an answer. He really just views this as a penalty. It's not by the letter of the law. It's a penalty that the rabbis institute. Ika de Amri. Some people say that that wasn't the question. The answer to the question was obvious, that it was a knas. Okay, haloi bayalan. That wasn't the question. Why? Well, because Rav has a different version of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah that we quoted in the first source that we had to answer the question about the behemah that went down in value, and flips Tanakama and Rabbi Meir, and you'll see why this makes all the difference. Vitane, it says he reads the Mishnah as this: Gaza para v'izkina, you stole a para and it got old. Avadim v'izkinu, or slaves and they got old. Mishalem kashat gzela divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir clearly holds, not like we suggested before, maybe he's just retorting to the rabbis. No, he's the one who holds no matter what, you pay at the moment of the gzela, which means shinui kone, which means that theoretically you shouldn't have to return the sheva. But, right, because remember, the whole nafkamina was what happens in a case where it decreases in value. Where it increases in value, we're going to penalize you and make you pay the extra to the original owner. But otherwise, we won't. And there you have it. And Chachamim are the ones who say, Ba'avadim omer lo harei shachal panecha. They're the ones who say, in Avadim it's different. But Vadai Rabbi Meir shinui kone, v'hacha knasu de kakanisle. So from there, it's clear. Again, taking Rav's version, these people who had this version of the question held by Rav, and said it's clear Rabbi Meir thinks shinui is kone, and it's just a knas. So then what's the question? Well, ki ka'ibailan, hachi bailan. This was the question. Ki kakanis b'mezid, aval b'shogeg lo kanis, o dilma afilu b'shogeg nami kanis. Now, this is a very good question. If the rabbis penalized you because you did this, are they penalizing only people who do it intentionally, or even people who do it unintentionally? Okay, eventually we're going to get back to the seamstress example or the dyer, right? That wasn't intentional. It was a mistake. Now, careless mistake, but that's what shkaga is, right? They should have paid more attention to what you wanted and not confused your order with someone else's order. But the fact is they messed it up, but it was not intentional. So now there, notice there wasn't a knas. I'm kind of giving away the answer. In the end, they're going to prove from there that it was shogeg, you're not going to have to pay a penalty because they didn't have to pay the sheva, right? They got to keep those pants and now they can sell it to somebody who's interested in pants, right? And they'll make money off of that. But, you know, they'll return you exactly what you gave them and you'll have to just start from square one. So that's because, you know, right? That's because the knas is not instituted for someone who does it by accident. Right? That's the gist of it. But right now we're in the question, even though I gave away, unfortunately, the punchline, but I did it also to make it a little easier for you to understand the stuff because it's a little complicated. So now, Tashma, let's learn from here. First, they're going to bring a different source. You might remember we talked about lien property, right? If we have a loan, generally it means I can collect even from property that you sell to other people, that you sell after you took out the loan. You sell your property to somebody else, I can go and collect directly from them my loan if you don't have money to pay me back. That's called nechasim meshuabadi. But there's 5 situations where I can't do that. And I can only collect directly from you property that you have and that's in your possession, that's free, that's not sold to somebody else. So what are these? Peirot, proceeds, which we don't really know what that is, and the Gemara is really not going to discuss that much. Shevach peirot, the extra that came from peirot, we don't really know what this is. The Gemara is going to get back to it. Hamekabel alav lazum ben ishto bat ishto. If a man commits to the wife, she comes into the marriage with children, and she says, I want you to commit that you'll give food to my children. So he commits. It can only be collected from free property, because you can't go collect it from people he sold land to. And get chov she'ein bo achrayut. Get doesn't mean a get here. Get just means a document of like a loan. Okay, this is weird, but this is a loan. She'ein bo achrayut. We didn't write in the loan document that I can go collect it from lien property. If we didn't write that, then I can't collect it from lien property. I can only collect it from free property that you have. If you don't have, I'm stuck. And ketubah isha she'ein ba achrayut. And a ketubah of a woman that you didn't write in achrayut. Okay, now this might contradict something we've learned earlier, if you remember, and if it does, that's good. We'll figure it if we'll explain it right now. But we actually learned before, both in a ketubah and in a loan document, achrayut ta'ut sofer. That means if we didn't write achrayut in the shtar, it's as if it's written. Meaning, if we took out a loan or I have a ketubah, we assume that I can collect it from lien property, even if it's not written. What it means, achrayut ta'ut sofer, means if it's not written in the document, we assume it was a mistake and the sofer just forgot to put it in. But it's basically what we would call this an unwritten condition. It's obvious. Now, this source clearly doesn't hold that way, and that's the problem with this source. This source clearly holds only if you write it. If you didn't write it, you cannot collect from lien property. So now what we have to do is the first thing we're going to do, we're trying to figure out Rabbi Meir. So the first thing we have to do is prove that this source was said in the name of Rabbi Meir. We don't know it was. But now they're going to say it's obvious it's Rabbi Meir. Why? So that's stage 1. There's 2 stages to understand how we're going to use this as a proof. Man shamat leita amar achrayut lav ta'ut soferhu. Number 4 and 5 are based on the premise that achrayut is not a ta'ut sofer. If you didn't write it in, there is no such thing. There's no guarantee. Who holds that? Rabbi Meir holds that. Okay, that's just known that Rabbi Meir is the one who holds. We don't say achrayut is ta'ut sofer. So with that, we've proven this source is Rabbi Meir. Now that's from cases 4 and 5. We have a list of 5 things. Now we're going to go back to number 2 on the list. Katani perot v'shevach perot. Okay, they list number 1 and 2, but they're really dealing with number 2. What is shevach perot? Hechidami. What's the case of shevach perot? What they're going to try to prove is that shevach perot is a case of shogeg. And then let's see what the law is. Okay, shevach perot you can't collect from lien property. So let's see. Hechidami. Kigon shegazal sadeh mechavero. Okay, let's go back to our case of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth steals a field from Naomi and then sells it to Yael. Okay, Yael now invests in the land. It grows, and Naomi comes to get her land back. What does she do? Okay, so now she takes the land from Yael, takes it back. Okay, the land was, let's say, 100 when Ruth stole it. And now Naomi gets it back from Yael. She takes all the land that was stolen, but Yael already increased its value to 150. So now what happens? Yael goes back to Ruth and says, Keshehu goveh et hakeren minechasim meshuabadin. So when she goes to get the money back that she lost now on account of Ruth having sold her stolen property, she demands 100, the value of it. She could get even from land that Ruth sold to somebody else. Well, the extra 50, though, that she collects from Ruth is only going to be from free property. If Ruth doesn't have money to collect from, she can't go collect it from lien property. That's what it's saying. Now, now we're going to learn what's underlying all this, and then we're going to get to some key points here. But what did we see in this case? When Naomi went to get her stolen property back, she took it back, including the shevach. She gets the shevach with it, okay? And who has to pay the shevach in the end? Ruth. Ruth stole it and has to pay it back, not at the value. And in the end, what happens? She has to pay the extra 50. Okay, now, but really it's that when Yael gives back that land, she gives it back with the extra 50. My love, but now, so Yael loses her extra 50, and perhaps she'll get it back from Ruth, perhaps she won't, okay? But she loses it right from the get-go. She takes, when Naomi collects the land, she collects it with the shevach. Now, would you call Yael shogeg or not? Sort of depends on the circumstances, right? Well, you might think that the shkaga issue is, well, maybe she didn't know that the land was stolen, okay? She was investing in stolen property without knowing it was stolen. That actually wouldn't even be shogeg. That would be onus. That's not the case the Gemara is going to talk about. That's onus. That's really not her fault, and we certainly aren't going to penalize her if that's the case. Okay, that's already, if you remember, we've talked about there's mezi, there's shogeg, and then there's onus. Okay, we talked about when Adam Muad La'olam, there was a whole debate. When it comes to damages, is onus really exempt or not necessarily? But in general, onus we're going to say is more exempt. But we need to come up with a case of shogeg. Now, what would shogeg be? Shogeg would be that Yael knew that Ruth was selling her stolen property, but what did she think? She thought, okay, now my lab ba'ama aretz. Let's assume that Yael was an ama aretz. Okay, what does an ama aretz mean? A person who doesn't really know halacha. What halacha didn't she know? Halacha we learned earlier in the daf. Dilo yada de karka nigzelet, no ain't nigzelet. She didn't know if karka could be acquired or not. Now, if we say it could be acquired, then you would say the following. When Ruth sells it to Yael, the stolen property, this is what we call shinui reshut. We've learned about this before. Once it changes domain, and we assume that the original owner gave up on getting it back, okay, there was Yeush, she should be able to acquire it if karka's nigzelet. Now, we already learned karka's not nigzelet, but she thinks it is. So she goes investing in it thinking that no one can take this land away from her. Okay, that was her mistake, but that's shogeg. And what do we see here? She has to give back even the sheva. So from there you learn that even, right? So let's read it. Afilu hachi ka'ata ba'al karka v'shaka la'ara v'shivcha. Naomi could come back and take the land and the shevach. All the investment she put into it, she loses. Now she could try to get it back from Ruth, but maybe she won't get it back. So now, shma mina, shogeg nami kanus. From here you learn that even in shogeg, we're kones. So, Amre, now this is a funny answer. Lo, you could say, no, that's not the case here. It's not a shogeg case. It's a mezid case. She was a Talmid Chacham. She knew the halacha. And now, the problem is what? If you're a Talmid Chacham, we assume you're like a good person. If you're a good person, what were you doing buying stolen property when you know that stolen property is still the original owners and you're basically living in stolen property and investing in stolen property? It would be hard to call you a Talmid Chacham. I think what they mean here by Talmid Chacham is she happened to just know the halacha. Okay, not that she was a real Talmid Chacham. Of course, we also know Talmidei Chachamim. There are people who might, again, all depends how you define Talmid Chacham, but someone who might be knowledgeable and also not necessarily the best person. But in any case, that is a possible way to explain this, which means it's not even a shogeg case. If it's not a shogeg case, it doesn't help us to answer our question. So back to our question. Are you going to have to pay this knas if you're shogeg? So now, as I've already told you, we'll learn it from the case of the wool being dyed the wrong color. Tashma litzbo lo adom utzvo shachor, shachor utzvo adom. Rabbi Meir omer noten lo dmei samro. What does it say? What do you pay? Just the value of the wool, and you get to keep the sheva. Dmei samro in, dmei samro v'shivcholo. You don't have to pay the extra sheva. The isa kedatach b'shogeg nami kanas. And if you thought you'd be penalized also for shogeg, dmei samro v'shivchol by the vele. You should have had to return also the money, the wool, and the value of the wool, and the extra money, the value that you increased it. In the end, we learn it's a knas, and the knas is only if you did it intentionally, not by accident, and that's why there's a difference between our case and that case of what Rabbi Meir holds in both cases. So that was a pretty simple answer in the end. So what we did was, so far, again, I'm going to summarize our daf till now. Again, just at the beginning was finishing up the last contradiction to the source about the Takana of Rebbe. Then we moved on to this braita where we've talked about three opinions. We really only discussed Rabbi Meir so far. that if it increased in value by you, you have to return even the increase in value that happened in the property of the thief. And then we had two questions. Is this because he thinks it's really still owned by the person who was robbed? Or does he think it actually is acquired by the thief, but we penalize you in the end? Either we answer the question, yes, it's just a penalty. Or we say, no, that wasn't even a question. Everyone knows it's a penalty. The question is the penalty only for shogeg, for mazid, for intentional, or also b'shogeg, which we answered, it's only if it's intentional. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in both cases, we brought two sources to try to get to the answer. The first source was rejected, and the second source, which was the same in both, we were able to get to an answer. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Gzelach was Erebeina. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rowino Toki Ilu Hishuma Etzlo B'Kesef. Now, the way we explained it, both of them really say you pay back 120. So what's really the difference? My benai. We're going to have two different explanations, Rav Zevid and Rav Pappa. Then we're going to ask a question, a difficulty on Rav Pappa, resolve it, and then bring a braita to prove Rav Pappa. Amar Rav Zevid, b'shevach she'al gabei gzelah kamiflage. Okay, what does this mean? This means that they argue in a bit of a different case than we saw before. It was worth 120 when you stole it. It went up to 140, and now it's worth 140, and it's still on the animal. It's not that you sheared it. It's not that the child, the offspring was born. It's that it's now worth more money, okay? That's what it means, shevach sha'al gabei gzelah, that's on the actual animal. Rabbi Yehuda savar din nigzal have. Rabbi Yehuda says it goes back to the original. If it's now worth 140, you increased it from 120 to 140, and at the time of you get taken to court, you have to return the whole thing, the animal as is. And why is that? Because it's not really a change so much. That's not considered a significant, right? Just the fact they grew more wool on it, or that the offspring grew larger in utero. That's not such a change. So it actually goes back to the original owner. And Rabbi Shimon savar de gazlan having, and Rabbi Shimon says, right? Ro'ino toki'ilu hishuma etzlo. Right now, look at the words. According to Rabbi Yehuda, gzela chozer beinah, you return the animal as is. So now it's worth 140. You return it as is. Rabbi Shimon says you do an evaluation. Evaluation means evaluate what it was at the time. So you only have to return 120. Rav Pappa says, no, that's not the machlok. Everyone thinks that the gazlan, now this is a bit of a fake out. It's not really everyone thinks it goes to the gazlan, but everyone thinks that at least the gazlan gets part of it. Okay, now we're going to see what that means. And they have a machloket about what percentage, or does the gazlan just get a percentage, or does he get to keep the whole thing? So let's just go through. Rabbi Yehuda savar shevach she'al gabei gzelah kulu de gazlan. Okay, gzelah chozer beinah. Then you would have to say the gzelah goes back as it was at the time of the theft, and any extra the gazlan gets to keep, and that's the opposite of what he said in the previous. Shino is koneh, so he acquires, and anything the gazlan did, if I stole it from you and I invested in it, I get to keep my investment. Rabbi Shimon, what's this mechza shlisha l'ravia? Hu deshakil gazlan. Rabbi Shimon really says the opposite of what he said before, which is it really goes back to the original owner. But what? This is more similar. Now, I stole your animal. It's true I stole it, but while it was with me, I took care of it. Now, if, let's say I was your shepherd and I was watching your animals and I took care of it, generally there would be an agreement between us that I would get a percentage of the proceeds, like an aris, like a sharecropper. Same thing with the animals. I would get a shlish, a ravia. I would get either a quarter, a third, or a half. That depends on what the arrangement is in our town, which generally people get. So if I steal it, I'm no worse than that. It's really your animal, but I should get a percentage of my investment in it. In other words, I invested, so I get part of it. Okay, as a sharecropper, as a shepherd type arrangement. So really, it goes to the nigzal, but the gazlan gets a part of it. Okay, so according to Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, what he said in the beginning, Rav Pappa, is everyone agrees the gazlan gets part. Okay, it's just a matter of does he get the whole thing or does he get part? And what Rabbi Shimon says, we evaluate, based on, is it a quarter in this town that people get? Is it a third? Is it a half? And it just goes based on what the general custom is. Okay, so now we have a question on Rav Pappa from our Mishnah. It's not. Gazal para v'nitabra etzlo v'yalda. If the animal became pregnant, this is the third case in our Mishnah, the animal became pregnant after I'd stolen it and then gave birth. Rachel v'nitana etzlo gazazah. So now, it's right now at the end, right, when we get to court, the animal is without wool, just like it was at the time we stole it. Mishalem kishad gzela. Then I pay based on the time of the theft. Yalda in lo yalda hadra be'ena. But it sounds like only because the animal now went back to its original value, because it was 100 then and it's 100 now. But if it didn't give birth, it could be it sounds like I would pay the original value, the value as is now. I would return you an animal that's pregnant. Now, this is going to have to match somebody, and it's not going to match anybody according to Rav Pappa, because what this is saying basically is the extra sheva that it did by me that got pregnant and is pregnant now is going to all go back to you. So Bishlam ala Rav Zevid, this is fine because Damar Shevach Shal Gabeg Zela Dinigzal Have Le Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not really a shinui. This is something more natural that happens. Or shina b'mkomo made, and you get the animal back pregnant. That was your animal. You get it back as is. Hamani Rabbi Yehuda here, and then you'd say our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda. Ela Rav Pappa damar de gazlan have, but Rav Pappa says it goes to the gazlan, to the thief, right? To everybody. In other words, even if Rabbi Shimon thinks it goes to the nigzal, but he says, but the gazlan gets a percentage. That's not mentioned in the Mishnah. So Hamane, lo Rabbi Yehuda, who says it goes to the thief, and lo Rabbi Shimon, who says at least part of it goes to the thief, a percentage. This Mishnah said it all goes back to the original, right? Again, it's an inference from our Mishnah, and that's the whole point. So Amar Lecha Rav Pappa, don't infer that from our Mishnah. Just because it said it already gave birth doesn't mean if it didn't give birth, it would go back at full value. Even if it didn't give birth, if it was worth 100 and it wasn't pregnant at the time you stole it, you give it back at the value at which you stole it. So why did it specifically give a case where it already gave birth? Had katana yalda? I did nasiv reisha yalda because the case before was talking about a case where the animal gave birth. Remember, the Mishnah compared if it was already pregnant when I stole it and then gave birth, or if it got pregnant after I stole it and then gave birth. So it just said and gave birth because it was comparing it to the first, but it doesn't mean if it didn't give birth, I give it back as is, which is what we tried to infer. So that's not a question. Now we have to go with a braita. Tanya kavatei to Rav Pappa, braita to support him. And here we're going to have it explicitly. Rabbi Shimon Omer ro'ino toki ilu hishuma etzlo bekesef lemechza l'shlish l'revia. And there you have Rabbi Shimon says the percentages. So that proves Rav Pappa because the Rav Zevid didn't say anything about percentages. Last thing for today, Amar Rav Ashi ki avina be Rav Kahana ibailam. When I was in Rav Kahana's house, they asked him the following question. Rabbi Shimon the Gazlan gets percentages. Does he get percentages from the animal itself, or do we just pay him in money, in value? Okay, this is a basic question. Okay, like does he get from the shearings, let's say, or does he just get the amount, the value of it in money? Do you have to pay him from the actual object itself? And they learn it from here. Now, this is a funny sugya because they're going to say it without explaining what they learned from here, and we're going to have two opposite approaches in the commentaries, whether we say the answer is you can pay if you want only in value, or you have to pay the object. We don't know, okay? So, to Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Shlosha Shamin Lahem Hashevach U'Malino Tam B'Damim. Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, there's three situations where we evaluate the increase in value, and we give it to you in money, not in object, not in what the object was. Okay, so now the question is going to be, are these like our case, in which case we're going to say it's also bidamim and you don't get the actual wool or part of the animal? Or do we say, no, it's just these three cases and nothing else, and therefore you would get it in the value? So we don't know the answer to that question, but let's just go through the three cases quickly. Elohein, bechor lepashut. If you have two children, one's a firstborn who's going to get double portion, and the regular who's not a firstborn, and they both invest in the estate of the father after the father's death, and then they split it up. Now, each invested 50-50, but one's going to get 66% and one's going to get 33%, right? They're going to have to split it like that. So the extra shevach of the part that the bechor ends up with, he has to compensate the amount that increased in value from the time of the death of the father and give it to the other brother. That he only has to give him money. He doesn't have to give it in land. Let's say it was land or whatever it was. Second, Baal Chov L'Lokach or Baal Chov L'Yitomim. Okay, this is two similar cases. We talked about this before. You owe money to someone and they go collect it from the guy that you sold land to. So when they collect it and there's shevach, they already increased the value. So when they take the whole land that was given to them, that was lien to the loan, either from orphans, because it was their father's loan, or from someone who purchased the land. They take the land with the shevach, and then they have to return the shevach. Well, they don't have to return it with land. They could just return it in cash. Okay, those are the cases. The question is our case similar to these? And therefore, it would be value, it would be money, or is it not similar? It's just these three cases, no more. And then, so the answer to this question, we don't really know. Okay, with that, we finished for today. So again, quick summary. I know it's really late, but we finished up the contradiction that I already summarized. We dealt with Rabbi Meir, 2 versions of questions against him. Then we had 2 versions of what the machloka between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda is. And then once we resolved that, well, we didn't resolve it. We said there's 2 different opinions. We questioned Rav Pappa's, we answered it. Then we brought a braita to support him. And then we said, if we go with Rav Pappa, the shlish, how do we divide up the money? Do they get a third of what it is? Or can it only be does he only have to pay him the value, the money in cash? And we don't really have a clear answer, even though the Gemara thought they had a clear answer about that. Okay, wishing everybody a great day and b'sorot tovot.